The airport terminal thrummed with the usual chaos of early evening departures. Families hustled past with oversized luggage, travelers juggled coffee cups and boarding passes, and the hum of rolling suitcases on polished floors formed a steady, hypnotic rhythm. Overhead, the fluorescent lights cast a sterile glow, illuminating the endless rows of check-in counters, vending machines, and waiting areas. Most passengers were lost in their own worlds, staring at screens, scrolling through social media, or running late for flights. Everything felt ordinary until Atlas barked. Officer Daniel Reyes had been on duty for 5 years, stationed in the security section of one of America's busiest airports. He knew the hum of the terminal like a second heartbeat, but this moment was different. Atlas, his trusted German Shepherd partner, froze mid-step, ears snapping forward, muscles taut as a drawn bow. The dog's eyes locked onto a sleek black hardshell suitcase inching along the conveyor belt. And then it happened. A sharp, insistent bark, the kind that cut through the background noise like a gunshot. Reyes stiffened. Atlas rarely barked at luggage. Rarely, in fact, barked at anything without cause. The passengers nearby turned their heads, startled. Phones were lifted instinctively, the familiar click and whir of camera shutters piercing the air. A woman with a toddler paused, unsure whether to continue forward. A man juggling 3 carry-ons froze mid-step. Even the janitor pushing a cart across the terminal stopped, gripping his mop as if it were a lifeline. Reyes tightened his grip on Atlas' leash. "Easy, boy, easy," he murmured, though his heart was already hammering. Atlas growled low, a warning that vibrated through the linoleum floors. The dog's tail stiffened, bristling slightly as he pawed at the suitcase, nudging it with careful insistence. Something about the bag was wrong. Reyes could feel it deep in his chest. He had trained for moments like this, countless simulations of bombs, narcotics, and other hazards, yet a primal instinct told him this was different. More urgent, more personal. The suitcase moved behind the scanner curtain, and Atlas barked again, louder this time, straining forward with every ounce of strength. Passengers murmured among themselves, forming a tentative circle at a cautious distance. A mother pulled her child back, whispering reassurances, though her wide eyes betrayed her fear. Reyes stepped closer to the curtain, feeling the weight of every gaze on him. He motioned for the TSA agents to halt the conveyor belt. "Hold everything," he said firmly. His voice carried authority, but also an undercurrent of tension that made even the most impatient travelers pause. From behind the curtain, the suitcase vibrated slightly, as if it had a heartbeat of its own. Atlas whined now, a low, desperate sound that tugged at the edges of fear in everyone's chest. Reyes crouched, trying to calm the dog without losing control of the situation. The airport security cameras swiveled, catching every movement, every expression. The passengers could see the silhouette of a man in his mid-30s inching toward the suitcase from the other side of the conveyor. He was tall, lean, and dressed in a nondescript dark jacket and jeans. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the strap of his shoulder bag, glancing nervously at Atlas and then at Reyes. Reyes called, his voice steady but edged with caution. "Step back from the bag." The man froze for a heartbeat too long. Atlas barked again, the sound slicing through the terminal with urgency. Every person within 30 feet instinctively took a half-step back, sensing danger even without knowing its form. The man laughed nervously, a high-pitched, forced sound that did nothing to disguise the tension in his eyes. "It's just my luggage," he said quickly, voice cracking. "Clothes, that's all. Nothing to worry about." Reyes' gaze narrowed. Lies were often easy to spot. He had seen smugglers, drug mules, and even the occasional would-be bomber. Atlas was rarely wrong. The dog's hackles remained raised. He refused to sit. His eyes locked onto the man, a silent accusation that pierced deeper than any human interrogation. Sweat gleamed on the man's forehead under the bright terminal lights. He swallowed, nervously tugging at the suitcase handle, but did not move away. His hesitation spoke volumes. Reyes signaled for additional officers. Within seconds, 2 TSA agents and a plainclothes officer appeared at his side. Their presence only seemed to make the man more anxious. He glanced toward the exit, as if considering escape. Atlas whined again, pawing at the floor. His gaze never left the suitcase, never leaving the man. It was almost as if the dog knew both threats, the immediate danger of the suitcase and the potential betrayal of its owner. Ray's hand hovered near his radio, ready to call for a containment team if the situation escalated. The terminal had gone eerily silent. Travelers instinctively lowered their voices, sensing that this was no ordinary security check. Phones were out, cameras recording. Someone whispered, "Is it a bomb?" The words spread like wildfire, eyes darting around, searching for confirmation. Ray's clenched his jaw. He didn't know yet. He only knew one thing: Atlas would not lie. Then came the sound, a faint shifting from within the suitcase, almost imperceptible over the hum of the terminal but distinct enough for Ray's and Atlas to hear. The dog growled low, his stance rigid, tail stiff like a flagpole in the wind. The shifting stopped, then started again. Faster, quicker, unnatural, and Atlas barked again, louder this time, a warning that something inside the suitcase was alive. Ray's pulse raced. The man's eyes widened. His hands fumbled, trying to grab the suitcase, but Atlas lunged, barking furiously. "Step back," Ray's shouted, and for the first time the man hesitated in true fear. Around them, passengers instinctively backed away, some whispering frantically, others frozen in disbelief. Even the security personnel exchanged a tense glance, realizing that this was no routine alarm. Seconds felt like hours. The suitcase owner tried again to move forward, desperate, pleading, muttering something about just following orders. But his words were lost in Atlas' relentless barking. Ray's crouched lower, voice firm. "Do not touch the bag, I mean it." Atlas barked again, his eyes never leaving the man. The terminal's overhead announcements continued mechanically, but they were drowned out by the tension that had gripped every person in sight. And then the suitcase shifted again, this time more violently, almost as if something inside were aware of the attention. Atlas barked louder, growling at the moving object. The dog's instincts were clear. This was not an ordinary threat. Ray's knew every second mattered. The man's hands twitched. He looked at the exits. He looked at Atlas. And for a heartbeat he froze, paralyzed by fear and indecision. Ray's tightened his grip on the leash. Atlas barked once more, urgent, commanding. The sound reverberated through the terminal. Something inside that suitcase was alive. Something that could not speak, could not fight, yet demanded attention in a way that no human could ignore. Passengers held their breath. Phones hovered mid-recording. A few began murmuring in panic, a ripple of tension flowing through the crowd. Ray's glanced at Atlas, feeling the weight of his partner's unspoken warning. This was only the beginning. Whatever was in that suitcase, whatever had set Atlas off, would change the night and possibly many lives forever. And then, just as suddenly as it started, Atlas stopped barking. His body remained tense, ears pricked, eyes locked. The air in the terminal hung heavy. Ray's knew the next move would define everything. The suitcase was waiting. And whatever, or whoever, was inside, it wasn't going to stay hidden for long. The terminal had fallen into a hush that felt almost unnatural. Travelers hovered on the edges of the scene, gripping phones and backpacks, whispering questions they didn't know how to ask. Atlas sat rigid, muscles coiled, eyes fixed on the black suitcase that now seemed impossibly ominous under the harsh fluorescent lights. Officer Daniel Ray's hands were tight on the leash, heart hammering, mind racing through every training scenario he had ever run. Every instinct screamed that this wasn't about clothes. Then the man emerged. Mid-30s, thin, slightly hunched, face pale under the bright terminal lights. Sweat streaked his temples despite the cool, conditioned air. He raised his hands, shaking, voice cracking as he tried to force a laugh. "It's just my luggage," he said, forcing a nervous grin. "Clothes, really. Nothing to worry about." His gaze darted nervously to Atlas, who responded with a low, threatening growl that vibrated through the polished floor tiles. Ray's narrowed his eyes. Lies were often easy to detect, and he had years of experience spotting them. This man's voice wavered, his eyes shifted too quickly, too frequently. Atlas' hackles remained raised. The dog was never wrong. Not about drugs, not about explosives. and certainly not about what was alive in that suitcase. The man inched toward the suitcase as if compelled by some unseen force. I need to get this onto the cart," he stammered, voice tight with panic. Reyes raised his hand, signaling for him to stop. "Sir," he said, voice calm but steely, "step back, keep your hands where I can see them." Atlas growled again, a low, warning growl that seemed to vibrate in everyone's chest. The man froze, the muscles in his jaw tight, the smile gone, replaced by a flicker of fear that didn't disappear. Passengers whispered nervously, stepping back as far as they could. Phones hovered, recording the tense scene. Even the janitorial staff had stopped, carts abandoned mid-aisle. The air had gone heavy with the kind of tension that presses down on the chest and makes it hard to breathe. Everyone in the terminal felt it. Something extraordinary and terrifying was happening. Reyes noticed a subtle movement in the man's hands. He was twitching, shifting, adjusting his weight as though ready to flee. And then he muttered something under his breath, almost inaudible. "I didn't want to, I had no choice." His eyes darted toward the exit again, calculating his chance to bolt. Atlas barked again, sharp and commanding, lunging slightly toward the suitcase. "Step away from the bag now," Reyes barked, the authority in his voice leaving no room for negotiation. The man froze, his face drained of color, sweat glistening in the overhead lights. "It's not what it looks like," he whispered, voice shaking. "I was following instructions." The words barely registered over the mounting panic around them. Atlas pawed at the floor, whining, growling, refusing to sit. His eyes darted between the suitcase and the man, as if sensing the truth before any human could. Reyes called in additional backup, voice calm but firm. 2 more TSA agents and a plainclothes officer moved swiftly into position, flanking the man while keeping a safe distance from the suspicious bag. The man's eyes widened as he realized he had nowhere to go. The terminal seemed to contract around them, the bustling background of rolling suitcases and boarding calls fading into a tense, almost suffocating silence. Then the X-ray image appeared on the screen. The supervisors had rerouted the scanner output to a mobile monitor near Reyes. The terminal collectively held its breath as the image flickered to life. At first glance it looked ordinary, just a black suitcase. But then something caught Reyes' trained eye. Shapes. Odd, rounded shapes that shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly. No electronics, no weapons, no drugs, yet the image didn't make sense. There was movement inside. Atlas whined again, pawing at Reyes' leg. His tail was low now, tip twitching nervously. The passengers around them felt the tension, some pressing phones closer, whispering questions. One woman murmured to her husband, "Is that a bomb?" Another shook her head, disbelief clear. Reyes ignored them, focusing on the X-ray screen. The shapes inside didn't resemble clothing. They resembled something alive. The man's panic escalated. He began shifting his weight, twitching, looking desperately for an escape. "You don't understand," he shouted suddenly, voice cracking. "I had no choice. They told me." He stopped abruptly, eyes widening in terror, realizing his words were both a confession and a liability. Atlas barked again, relentless and urgent, ears forward, body tense. Reyes felt the blood drain from his face. The terminal had gone quiet, save for the occasional whisper or camera click. The passengers had begun backing away, some pressing against walls, some clutching their children tightly. Phones hovered mid-recording, capturing the tense tableau unfolding. The man's fingers fumbled at the suitcase handle. He was going to open it, Reyes realized with a spike of dread, and he couldn't let that happen. "Step away from the bag, now," Reyes shouted. The man hesitated, then froze, looking down at Atlas, looking up at Reyes, realizing there was no easy way out. His eyes darted toward the exits again, calculating. Atlas barked again, sharp, commanding, his stance unyielding. The suitcase shifted again, this time noticeably, almost violently. Whatever was inside it was alive, moving, reacting to the tension around it. Passengers gasped collectively, some pressing phones closer to record, others holding their breath. The man tried to speak, but his words caught in his throat. The fear in his eyes was raw, naked, palpable. I was told," he muttered, voice trembling. "I had to," but Atlas barked again, relentless. It wasn't just a warning. It wasn't just instinct. It was urgency, the kind that spoke louder than words. Reyes realized he had only seconds to act. The bag had shifted again, the movement unmistakable now, almost frantic. Atlas' hackles were fully raised, teeth bared slightly, eyes locked on the suitcase. The man's hands twitched again, indecision clear in every micro-movement. The tension was electric. Every person in the terminal felt it, even those standing 50 feet away. Then the unthinkable happened. The suitcase owner took a half-step forward as though compelled by some invisible force. Atlas lunged, barking, growling, and leaping against the leash, the sound of his bark echoing through the terminal like a siren. Passengers gasped, some screaming in alarm. The man froze completely, eyes wide, realizing he had underestimated the dog. Reyes didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, placing himself firmly between Atlas and the man. "You will not touch that bag," Reyes commanded, voice steady, carrying the weight of authority. The man's lips trembled. I, he tried again, but words failed him. Atlas barked again, urgent, insistent, clawing at the floor. The suitcase thumped slightly, a strange, almost human-like movement that made the hairs on Reyes' neck stand on end. The terminal seemed to shrink, the fluorescent lights glaring, passengers frozen in a tableau of fear and anticipation. Reyes took a deep breath. He knew one thing with absolute certainty: whatever or whoever was inside that suitcase was alive, and it was dependent on him and Atlas to get it out safely. The man's panic, the suitcase's movement, and Atlas' unrelenting warnings had created a bubble of tension so thick it seemed tangible. Every second mattered now. And then a faint, irregular sound emerged from the suitcase. A tiny, desperate cry. Atlas barked again, even louder, more frantic. The man's face turned ashen, his knees trembling. The passengers recoiled, some instinctively covering their children's ears, others frozen in disbelief. Reyes' heart pounded. He knew what he had to do. This wasn't just a suspicious bag. This wasn't a drill. This was life and death, hidden inside the cold, black shell of a suitcase. And in that moment, everything hung in perfect, unbearable suspense. The suitcase, the dog, the man, and the helpless crowd of bystanders who had stumbled into a nightmare none of them could have imagined. Reyes' eyes met Atlas, silent understanding passing between man and dog. Whatever was in that suitcase was about to reveal itself. The terminal hung in a tense, uneasy silence. Travelers pressed their phones closer, whispering in disbelief, yet frozen in place as if the scene unfolding before them were a live broadcast of some impossible drama. Atlas sat rigid, his eyes locked on the black suitcase as though he could see through the steel shell, through the locks, directly into the life contained within. Officer Daniel Reyes felt his pulse spike. This was no ordinary security alert. Every instinct in his body screamed the same warning. Something inside that bag was alive, fragile, and in desperate need of rescue. The man who had tried to claim ownership of the suitcase was sweating profusely now. His hands fidgeted at his sides, lips trembling. He muttered again, I had no choice." His eyes darted nervously between Atlas, Reyes, and the bag. The dog growled low, a deep, rumbling sound that resonated through the floor, vibrating in the bones of everyone standing nearby. Atlas' tail stiffened, brushing the polished tiles like a warning flag. Passengers instinctively stepped back, some covering their mouths in shock, others clutching children tightly. The atmosphere thickened with fear and curiosity. Reyes motioned for the X-ray monitor to zoom in. The display flickered to life, a grainy, backlit image showing the contents of the black suitcase. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. The outline of the luggage filled the frame, and the usual markers for clothing, electronics, or standard travel items appeared. But then something caught Reyes' eye. Two distinct shapes shifted slightly, inconsistently, almost imperceptibly, as if they were moving independently from the suitcase's motions. Reyes' jaw tightened. He called a colleague over to verify. "Look at the upper corner," he said, pointing. "Do you see that movement?" The agent leaned in, frowning. "Is that alive?" he asked, voice barely a whisper. Atlas barked sharply, a warning, pawing at the floor again. The dog's behavior confirmed what Reyes had feared. This wasn't a false alarm. Whatever was inside that suitcase was alive, fragile, and probably terrified. The man's panic escalated visibly. He took a small step backward, eyes wide, muttering under his breath, "You don't understand, I had no choice." The words were barely audible, but they carried a weight that froze Ray's momentarily. Atlas barked again, relentless and commanding, tail stiff, muscles coiled. The dog's instincts were clear. This was a life-or-death situation. The owner's hesitation, his trembling hands, only intensified the tension. Ray's knew he had to act fast. "Sir, step back from the bag," he commanded, voice sharp. "Now." The man froze, but the bag shifted again, more noticeably this time. Something inside moved with a faint, irregular rhythm, almost like breathing. A tiny thump reverberated inside the suitcase, causing Atlas to bark again, louder, more insistent. The passengers gasped collectively. A mother whispered, "Is it a child?" But even she didn't know. Everyone's eyes remained fixed on the black suitcase, frozen in suspense. The man swallowed hard, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. I was told what to do," he muttered. His voice trembled as if speaking the truth aloud could undo the unimaginable task he had been forced to undertake. Atlas' growl deepened, vibrating across the floor as the dog pawed urgently at the tiles. The instinctive tension between the man and the dog was palpable, creating a tangible ripple in the air. Every traveler in the vicinity instinctively took a step back, some raising their hands defensively, others holding their children closer. Ray's raised his radio. "Containment and medics, now, and keep the area clear. We have a live situation here." His eyes never left the X-ray screen. The shapes inside the suitcase shifted again, small, almost imperceptible movements that became increasingly frantic. Atlas barked once more, loud and urgent, tail stiff as a rod, ears pinned forward. This was no longer just a suspicious bag. This was a ticking clock. The suitcase shifted violently for a moment, almost as if aware of the attention it had attracted. Atlas lunged forward slightly, teeth bared, the warning deep and resonant. Ray's hand tightened on the leash. "Do not open it yet," he ordered, though every fiber of his being wanted to act immediately. The passengers murmured nervously, some gripping phones, others whispering prayers. The man trembled, eyes darting toward the exits as if plotting a desperate escape that he couldn't take. Then came the sound, a faint whimper almost drowned out by the hum of the terminal. It was soft, irregular, and almost inhuman in its smallness. Atlas barked again, frantic this time, the sound vibrating like a siren. The man's eyes widened in horror. He took a small step back, realizing the gravity of the situation. They said, he stammered, but his words trailed off. Atlas' growl deepened, a low rumble vibrating through the polished floor. Ray's didn't hesitate. He signaled for the officers around him to stand ready. "We are opening this now," he said firmly, voice carrying authority, precision, and calm in the storm of panic surrounding them. Atlas remained tense, barking, urging the human to act, almost impatiently. The X-ray images, the subtle movements, and the faint sounds coming from the suitcase all pointed to one undeniable truth. The bag contained life, small, fragile, and dependent on immediate intervention. The man's face turned ashen. Sweat glistened across his temples. I was told they'd die if I didn't," his voice cracked, breaking under the weight of guilt and fear. He flinched as Atlas barked again, the sound deafening, demanding action, forcing honesty. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, whispers growing louder, some trying to make sense of what they were witnessing. Cameras and phones clicked incessantly, capturing a moment that felt impossible to comprehend. Ray's crouched slightly, hand resting on Atlas' collar. He could feel the dog's tension vibrating through him. This wasn't just instinct anymore. Atlas was pleading silently for Ray's to act, to save the lives inside. The X-ray images flickered, the movements inside the suitcase more frantic now. Time was collapsing, and every second counted. The man made a sudden, half-hearted step forward, attempting to reach for the suitcase. Atlas barked again, sharper, more commanding. His hackles were fully raised, teeth bared slightly. The passengers gasped, stepping back instinctively, watching a scene that could not have been more tense or cinematic. Ray stepped firmly in front of Atlas, blocking any access, eyes narrowing, adrenaline surging. "Do not touch the bag," he shouted, authority cutting through the terminal noise. The suitcase shifted again. This time it moved violently, a small bump followed by a soft thump that reverberated eerily. Atlas barked again, fierce, urgent, relentless. Everyone in the terminal felt it, the tension, the fear, the possibility of something unimaginable inside the bag. The man's lips quivered, face pale, sweat streaking down his temples. I did," he whispered, realizing that whatever was inside the suitcase had been alive and in danger, and he had been the unwilling courier. Ray's heart pounded in his chest. Atlas continued barking, unyielding, insistent, his gaze locked on the suitcase as if it were pleading for help. The passengers held their breath. The air in the terminal felt electric, as if the very atmosphere was charged with suspense. Every eye was glued to the scene, every ear straining to hear the faint sounds of life inside that suitcase. Then, faint but unmistakable, came the first true sound of life, a tiny, fragile whimper, barely audible over the hushed terminal. Atlas barked again, louder, almost desperate. The man's knees buckled slightly as the realization hit him. This wasn't just contraband or dangerous goods. This was life, fragile, precious, human life, and it was entirely in their hands now. The terminal seemed to shrink around them, the bright lights glaring, the polished floors reflecting every tense movement, every anxious expression. Ray's knew there was no time left for hesitation. He glanced at Atlas, reading the dog's urgent expression. The whimper came again, followed by a faint, irregular thumping from inside the suitcase. He signaled to the officers. Medics were on standby, containment teams ready. Every second counted. Whatever or whoever was inside that suitcase depended on their next move. And as Ray slowly reached for the suitcase, heart hammering, passengers frozen in awe, Atlas barked one final time, fierce, commanding, insistent, almost as if saying, "This is it. Save them." The suspense was unbearable. The terminal felt suspended in time. And at that moment, no one could predict what would happen when the suitcase finally opened. The terminal had become an unnatural cage of anticipation. Officers and TSA agents formed a tight perimeter around the black suitcase, a living wall of authority, while travelers hovered just beyond, caught between curiosity and fear. Phones hovered mid-recording, capturing the moment as though the world outside the terminal could somehow understand the gravity of what was happening. Atlas sat tense at Officer Daniel Ray's side, muscles coiled, ears forward, eyes locked on the suitcase as though he could sense the life pulsating within it. Ray's took a deep breath, feeling Atlas' taut energy radiate through him. Every training exercise, every simulated emergency he had endured over 5 years had prepared him for hazards, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. Whatever lay inside that suitcase was alive. Whatever it was, it needed immediate help, and time was running out. "Clear the area," Ray's instructed firmly, gesturing to officers and passengers alike. The murmurs of onlookers faded as the perimeter tightened, leaving a bubble of tension around the suitcase. The man who had attempted to claim ownership of the bag trembled, sweat streaking his face, eyes darting between the suitcase and Atlas. "Please, please don't," he stammered, voice breaking. Atlas barked sharply, cutting him off. It was clear that neither deception nor hesitation would be tolerated. Ray's knelt slowly beside the suitcase, the polished tiles cold beneath his knees. His gloved hands rested on the handle, feeling its subtle vibrations, the soft, almost imperceptible movement of the life trapped inside. Atlas whined, low and insistent, pawing at Ray's leg as if urging him to act faster. The moment had arrived. Every instinct told Ray's to move carefully but deliberately. Hesitation could cost lives. With a firm grip, Ray's lifted the suitcase's latch, hearing the faint click of the lock disengaging. A collective intake of breath rose from the crowd, a ripple of tension that seemed to vibrate through the entire terminal. The lid of the suitcase creaked as it slowly opened, revealing a scene that would haunt every person present for years to come. Inside, swaddled in thin, worn blankets, were two tiny infants, alive, barely moving. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, lips quivering as if trembling from cold, fear, or both. One let out a faint, desperate cry, so soft it could have been mistaken for a whisper. Atlas barked again, this time a mixture of relief and insistence, pawing at the suitcase as if demanding Ray's act faster. Ray's chest tightened painfully. He had seen tragedy, disaster, and crime scenes, but nothing like this. Infants so small, so fragile were packed into a suitcase, smothered under layers of blankets, their tiny bodies struggling against the confinement. The weight of responsibility hit him all at once. Every officer, every bystander, every person in that terminal was suddenly aware of the stakes. These bobbies had survived something unimaginable. They were alive against all odds, but only just. TSA agents immediately moved forward, carefully lifting the infants from the suitcase. Paramedics, already on site, took over, placing them on portable warming blankets, attaching oxygen masks, and gently assessing their vital signs. The terminal was a whirlwind of coordinated chaos, medical personnel working with surgical precision while Atlas remained tense at Ray's side, eyes never leaving the tiny figures, growling softly as if supervising the rescue. The man who had tried to claim ownership of the suitcase crumpled to the floor, tears streaming down his face. "They said they'd die if I didn't do it," he sobbed, voice shaking with a mixture of fear, guilt, and despair. Officers restrained him gently but firmly, understanding that he was a frightened pawn rather than the mastermind. Atlas barked again, a low, rumbling sound, and Ray's patted the dog's head, feeling the unspoken bond between man and animal. They had both sensed the danger before anyone else. Passengers watched in stunned silence, some covering their mouths, others crying quietly. Phones recorded the unfolding scene, ready to circulate the story across social media, but nothing could truly capture the tension, the fear, and the fragile hope in that terminal. The bobbies were barely breathing, their tiny chests rising and falling with the effort of survival. Every movement, every soft cry, drew gasps from those who understood the magnitude of what had been discovered. Ray's knelt beside Atlas, voice low but steady. "Good job, boy," he murmured, feeling the weight of the moment settle on him. Atlas wagged his tail slightly, still alert, still protective, understanding in his own way that the immediate threat had been neutralized, but the danger was far from over. The infants needed intensive care, their lives still hanging by a fragile thread. Medics worked quickly, placing the infants in transport incubators, checking temperatures, and preparing them for immediate transfer to the hospital. The man continued to sob quietly, repeating fragments of explanations about threats and instructions he had received. Ray's listened, his mind racing with questions. Who had entrusted these infants to a suitcase? Why were they being smuggled through the airport? And most importantly, who could have been so cruel as to put them in such danger? The terminal slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy, though the air remained thick with tension. Travelers whispered among themselves, some shaken, others awed. Atlas remained at Ray's side, vigilant, growling lowly at anyone who came too close. It was clear that the dog understood the significance of what had just occurred. This was more than a routine intervention. It was a rescue that had changed the trajectory of two fragile lives forever. As the infants were carefully lifted into ambulances, their tiny cries mingling with the sounds of sirens and rushed footsteps, Ray's allowed himself a brief moment to breathe. Atlas pawed gently at his leg, a reminder that their work was never done, but also a quiet acknowledgement of success. The bond between officer and dog had proven indispensable, a silent partnership that had prevented tragedy in its most raw, terrifying form. Yet even as the bobbies were whisked away to the hospital, Ray's knew the story was far from over. Questions lingered like shadows in the terminal. Who was behind this? Why these infants? And how many others might still be trapped, unseen, unheard, and at the mercy of fate? Atlas barked again, insistent and protective, signaling that the danger, though momentarily contained, was not fully resolved. Ray's looked down at the man, still crumpled and trembling. Officers had begun questioning him gently, extracting what little information he could provide. The man's words were fragmented, chaotic, and dripping with fear, but one message was clear. There was a larger operation at work, one that involved threats, coercion, and unimaginable cruelty. Reyes felt a chill run down his spine. The rescue of these two infants was a victory, yes, but it was also a warning that the fight to protect the innocent was far from over. As Atlas remained at Reyes' side, ears pricked and eyes scanning the crowd, Reyes realized the magnitude of what had occurred. A single bark, a single instinct had saved lives tonight. The terminal, though slowly returning to normalcy, would never forget the tension, the fear, or the fragile hope that had hung in the air like a living thing. And as the last paramedics left with the bobbies, the man restrained in handcuffs, and the crowd dispersed, Reyes and Atlas remained, standing over the now empty suitcase. The silence was deafening, heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. The terminal would continue to hum with ordinary chaos, unaware that only moments earlier, death had almost walked unnoticed among them. Atlas barked softly once more, almost a sigh of relief, tail wagging slightly. Reyes patted him gently. "We did good, boy," he whispered, though the magnitude of the night's events was only beginning to sink in. One question lingered in the officer's mind as he glanced at the empty suitcase. How many more were out there, waiting for the wrong person, waiting for someone who might not notice until it was too late? The suspense hung heavy. The rescue had succeeded, but the story, the investigation, and the unraveling of a horrifying truth were just beginning. And somewhere beyond the terminal walls, the forces that had put those infants in peril were still active, waiting, watching, and planning their next move. The wail of ambulance sirens cut sharply through the cool night air as the paramedics loaded the two fragile infants into the back of the vehicle. Officer Daniel Reyes sprinted beside them, Atlas matching his pace, ears forward, tail stiff. Every second counted. The bobbies' tiny bodies were pale, almost translucent in the harsh interior lights of the ambulance, swaddled in thin blankets that offered barely any warmth. Their chests rose and fell in uneven, shallow breaths, each inhale a delicate struggle against the cold and fear that had consumed them inside that black suitcase. Passengers in the terminal had begun to disperse, whispering frantic questions and exchanging shocked glances. Phones recorded the scene, live streams capturing the unfolding emergency, and social media would erupt with the story within hours. But for Reyes, all of that faded into the background. This wasn't about headlines or viral footage. This was life and death, raw and immediate. Atlas barked once more, insistent, as if urging Reyes to move faster. The man who had tried to claim the suitcase had been restrained and led away by officers. His pleas were broken, incoherent, laced with fear. "I didn't want to, I had no choice," he stammered, struggling against the cuffs, eyes darting toward the ambulance. Reyes caught the look, the desperation and guilt of a man caught in something far larger than himself. But there was no time to dwell. The infants inside that ambulance needed everything now. Inside the vehicle, paramedics worked swiftly, adjusting portable warming units, placing oxygen masks over the tiny faces, and monitoring vital signs. Reyes and Atlas remained close, the dog sitting rigidly by Reyes' side, muscles coiled, eyes fixed on the infants as if he could understand their suffering in ways words never could. The smallest sound, a soft whimper, a flicker of movement, was enough to make Atlas bark softly in reassurance or warning. "Heart rates are low," one medic reported, voice tight with tension. "They've been exposed to cold and confinement too long. Another 10 minutes and we might not have a heartbeat on either." Reyes clenched his fists, jaw tight. He could feel Atlas shift beside him, a subtle nudge, a reminder of the dog's instinctual awareness. Together, they had been the first line of defense. Now every second mattered. The ambulance careened through the city streets, sirens blaring, weaving through traffic as officers cleared intersections ahead. Reyes' mind raced. Who had entrusted these infants to a suitcase? Why? Was this an isolated incident, or part of a larger network of trafficking, exploitation, and cruelty? Atlas growled softly, a deep, vibrating warning that Ray's took as a signal to stay alert. Danger in more forms than one was still present. At the hospital, doctors were already preparing the neonatal intensive care unit. Nurses arranged incubators, calibrated ventilators, and prepped emergency equipment. Ray's handed the infants over with trembling hands, watching as skilled professionals immediately went to work. Each baby was weighed, measured, and assessed. Their tiny limbs were fragile, delicate beyond comprehension, their breaths shallow but determined. Ray's chest tightened as he observed the first signs of response, weak, irregular movements, but alive. Atlas barked again softly, almost as if asking, "Are they going to make it?" Ray's knelt beside the dog, voice low and tired. "They're fighters, boy. You saved them." The dog leaned into him, tail brushing his knee, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had saved lives tonight. The hospital staff worked with urgency, transferring the infants into incubators where oxygen, warmth, and constant monitoring could give them a fighting chance. Outside the NICU, the restrained man had been brought in for questioning. His voice was barely above a whisper. They said the Bobbies would die if I did," he trailed off, tears streaking his face. Officers exchanged glances. It was clear that he had been a coerced courier in something far larger. Ray's listened silently, absorbing the fragments of truth he could offer. But the critical concern was immediate, the survival of the Bobbies. Hours passed like minutes. Monitors beeped steadily as medical staff worked tirelessly. One baby's condition stabilized first, the tiny chest rising and falling with more regularity. The second infant, however, remained precarious. The monitor beeped erratically. Alarms went off intermittently and staff rushed to adjust oxygen levels in warming units. Ray stood nearby, heart pounding, jaw tight, Atlas sitting alert beside him, tail flicking nervously. The clock was relentless. Time did not pause for desperation. Ray's thoughts drifted back to the airport, the black suitcase, the faint, fragile cries of life that had called them into action. Without Atlas' instinctive response, without the dog's unwavering vigilance, these infants might never have been discovered in time. The realization tightened a knot in his chest. Heroism often went unnoticed, but sometimes instinct and loyalty could change the course of life in ways that nothing else could. One nurse emerged, face unreadable, taking Ray's aside. "The first baby is stable," she said, voice tight with relief. "The second, it's touch and go. Another hour, maybe two, but they're fighting." Ray's exhaled slowly, tension flowing out of him in a long, silent release. Atlas barked softly again, sensing the slight reprieve, yet remaining alert, protective, vigilant. The dog had understood the urgency before anyone else. Outside the NICU, officers guarded the restrained man, listening as fragments of a terrifying story emerged. He spoke of a larger organization, threats, coercion, and unimaginable cruelty. Ray's absorbed the details, every word tightening the knot of anger, fear, and disbelief in his chest. These infants had been pawns in something horrific, their survival almost a matter of chance if not for Atlas and Ray's quick action. Ray's walked slowly to the incubators, kneeling beside them, peering through the glass at the tiny, fragile lives he had helped save. Their small movements, the faint flutter of eyelashes, and the irregular rise and fall of their chests were miracles in motion. Atlas rested his head lightly against Ray's leg, tail flicking in reassurance, his eyes still scanning the room, still protective. Together, man and dog had intervened in the narrowest margins of time to prevent an unimaginable tragedy. But even as relief began to settle, a creeping dread remained. Who had orchestrated this? How many others were out there? What else could go unnoticed in the chaos of airports, flights, and unchecked human greed? The urgency of the moment had passed, but the questions and the danger lingered, shadows at the edges of Ray's awareness. Ray stayed until the first signs of stability were assured, watching Atlas alert, protective, ready for any new threat. The infant's small hands twitched, gripping tiny blankets, tiny fingers curling with effort. Their breaths, though weak, were alive. Ray's whispered softly, "You're going to make it, both of you." The words felt insufficient, but they carried hope, determination, and gratitude. Outside the hospital room, reporters and social media had begun to stir. Videos from the terminal were circulating, views and comments exploding with disbelief and awe. Atlas, heroism became the headline. Reyes knew that while the world would praise the dog, the story wasn't over. The real battle, finding the people responsible, understanding the operation behind this smuggling, and ensuring these infants were safe, was just beginning. And yet in that quiet moment, as the alarms beeped softly and the tiny chests rose and fell, Reyes allowed himself a moment to feel the weight of victory. Atlas sat alert but calm, a silent partner in a rescue that had defied odds, instincts, and time itself. The bobbies were alive. They were safe for now. But the clock was still ticking, and somewhere beyond the hospital walls, the organization that had orchestrated this nightmare was still moving, watching, waiting. Reyes took a deep breath. He knew this was only the beginning. The hospital's fluorescent lights flickered slightly overhead as Officer Daniel Reyes paced the sterile hallway outside the NICU. Atlas sat at his side, ears alert, tail flicking in subtle agitation. The German shepherd's vigilance hadn't wavered since the suitcase had been opened. Reyes could feel the tension radiating off the dog, a silent reminder that the danger hadn't ended the moment the infants were safe. Somewhere out there, the real threat still lingered. Inside the NICU, paramedics and doctors worked tirelessly. Both infants were stabilized for the moment, but their fragile bodies bore the marks of extreme neglect and abuse: pale skin, low body temperatures, and subtle bruising around their delicate limbs. Reyes swallowed hard. The thought of what they had endured in that cramped, suffocating suitcase was almost unbearable. Atlas leaned against his leg, whining softly, as if echoing the silent outrage that ran through him. Hours later, the restrained man was brought to an interrogation room. His demeanor had shifted. The initial panic had given way to a broken, hollow fear. He recounted fragments of a larger operation, a clandestine trafficking ring that preyed on vulnerable families. He had been coerced into transporting the infants, threatened with violence against his own family if he refused. Every word dripped with fear and guilt. "They told me I had no choice," he repeated, voice barely above a whisper. "They said they'd kill me if I did." Reyes listened, taking careful notes. The man's fragmented story was horrifying but consistent, enough to indicate a pattern. This was not an isolated incident. Somewhere, countless other innocent lives were at risk, and this network operated in the shadows, exploiting desperation and fear. Reyes' chest tightened as the reality sank in. The rescue of these two infants, though miraculous, was just one battle in a much larger war. Atlas whined again, low and insistent, pawing at Reyes' leg. The dog's instincts seemed to echo the urgency of the situation. Life was fragile, danger was real, and vigilance was essential. Reyes knelt, resting a hand on Atlas' head. "You knew," he whispered. "You knew it wasn't just a suitcase." Atlas nudged his hand, a quiet affirmation of the bond they shared. Meanwhile, investigators at the airport had combed through footage from security cameras. Images of the man moving through checkpoints, the black suitcase rolling behind him, and Atlas, relentless barking, were scrutinized in painstaking detail. Patterns emerged: travel routes, suspicious contacts, timing. The evidence suggested a network spanning multiple states, possibly even crossing international borders. The stakes were enormous. Lives hung in the balance, and Reyes knew the clock was ticking. At the hospital, doctors reported that both infants had begun to respond to the treatment. Tiny hands twitched, faint cries escaped their lips, and subtle rises in body temperature indicated that they were fighting, clinging to life with astonishing resilience. Reyes allowed himself a brief moment of relief, but Atlas' alert posture reminded him that the danger outside the hospital walls was far from over. News of the rescue had already spread. Social media exploded with images and videos captured in the terminal: Atlas barking at the suitcase, the tense standoff, the frantic efforts of paramedics. Hashtags praising the heroic K9 surged in popularity, and messages of hope flooded in. But Reyes knew that public attention was a double-edged sword. While it raised awareness, it could also draw unwanted attention from the very people responsible for the trafficking ring. The operation was still active, still dangerous and possibly watching. The man in custody continued to provide fragments of the operation. He described coded messages, secret rendezvous points, and instructions delivered through intermediaries. Ray's stomach twisted as he imagined how many other infants might be hidden in the shadows, waiting for the same fate as the ones in the suitcase. Atlas growled softly, his senses alert to the unspoken threat, as if warning Ray's that the ring's influence might extend even to the hospital itself. Hours stretched into a tense vigil. Ray's remained by the incubators, observing the infant's delicate movements. The first baby's vitals stabilized further, allowing a small wave of hope to wash over him. The second, however, remained in a precarious state. Monitors beeped erratically, alarms punctuating the tense silence of the NICU. Atlas' ears twitched with every sound, his body rigid, alert to the slightest disturbance. The dog's presence was a constant reassurance, silent, watchful, ready to react. Late into the night, a team of federal agents arrived to coordinate with local law enforcement. Evidence from the airport, combined with the man's testimony, provided the foundation for a wider investigation. They spoke in hushed, urgent tones, reviewing flight manifests, transaction records, and surveillance footage. Ray's listened intently, feeling the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. The network was vast, and dismantling it would be dangerous, painstaking work. Atlas remained at Ray's side, occasionally whining softly or nudging his hand. The dog's instincts were extraordinary, a constant reminder that their first line of defense had been critical. Ray's whispered softly to him, "You saved them, Atlas. You saved their lives." The dog rested his head against Ray's knee, eyes alert, never closing fully. Even in moments of relief, vigilance was required. By dawn, both infants showed signs of improvement. Their tiny cries grew stronger, and subtle movements of limbs indicated that their fragile bodies were responding to care. Ray's allowed himself a small sigh of relief, though the weight of the investigation pressed heavily on him. Atlas barked softly, packing slightly, as if sensing that the story was far from over. Ray stepped into the hallway, taking a moment to survey the NICU. Nurses moved quietly, checking monitors and adjusting equipment. Officers kept watch outside the room, maintaining a perimeter to ensure safety. The man in custody sat silently, head bowed, still shaking. Ray's knew that the rescue was only the first step. The network behind the trafficking ring remained active, dangerous, and likely observing every move. As the city began to stir with the first light of morning, Ray's received a call from the airport investigation team. New evidence had emerged, patterns in passenger manifests, suspicious transactions, and encrypted communications suggested that the trafficking ring had broader operations than initially suspected. Ray's stomach tightened. The two infants had been saved, but countless others might still be in peril. Atlas whined softly, tail flicking nervously. Ray's knelt, placing a hand on the dog's head. "We're not done, boy," he whispered. "We have to find the rest of them." Atlas nudged his hand in acknowledgement, eyes bright and alert, ready for the next phase. Together, they would follow the trail wherever it led, facing danger, uncovering the truth, and protecting the innocent. Even as hope flickered for the infants in the NICU, a chilling reality loomed. The trafficking ring's reach extended far beyond the terminal and the hospital. Ray's knew that each step forward would be fraught with peril. Yet the urgency of the mission, rescuing the most vulnerable, exposing the perpetrators, dismantling the network, drove him forward. Atlas barked once, sharp and insistent, a reminder that vigilance was not optional. And somewhere beyond the city, beyond the hospital walls, the unseen forces behind the trafficking ring continued their operations. Rays could feel their presence in the shadows, watching, calculating, waiting for a chance to act. The fight was only beginning, and the stakes had never been higher. The infants were alive. That was a victory, but the story was far from over. Rays glanced at Atlas, and the dog's unwavering gaze told him everything. The danger wasn't gone. The network was still out there, and time was running out for those they hadn't yet found. Ray's exhaled slowly, his hand brushing Atlas' fur. "We'll find them," he whispered. "We have to." Atlas barked softly in response, alert and ready. Together, man and dog had faced the unimaginable and saved lives, and together they would continue the fight, undaunted, vigilant, and relentless. The tension hung heavy in the air. The investigation was underway, the danger palpable and the stakes higher than ever. But Reyes knew one truth above all. As long as he and Atlas were on the case, there was hope. Even in the face of unimaginable cruelty, even when lives hung by a fragile thread, courage, instinct, and loyalty could tip the balance. And somewhere in the shadows, the unseen puppeteers of the trafficking ring had just realized that the game had changed. Their careful, ruthless plans were now vulnerable to exposure. And in the hospital, in that quiet NICU, two fragile lives fought to survive, unaware that heroes, both man and dog, were watching over them, ready to face whatever came next. The city had woken to a storm of news coverage. Social media feeds exploded with the images of Atlas barking at the black suitcase, the tense standoff in the airport, and the dramatic rescue of the two infants. Hashtags praising the heroic K9 went viral within hours, videos shared and reshared with captions like "Airport Dog Saves Bobbies" and "Heroes Among Us." Yet, beneath the public adulation, a more sinister story was unfolding, one that Officer Daniel Reyes and his team had only just begun to unravel. Inside the hospital, the NICU buzzed with a cautious optimism. The infants' tiny bodies were beginning to respond, their weak cries growing slightly stronger, their fragile limbs twitching with life. Paramedics and nurses exchanged glances, relief tempered by the knowledge that the smallest complications could undo hours of progress. Reyes stayed close, Atlas at his side, muscles coiled, eyes scanning every corner of the room. Their presence was a protective shield, a reminder to everyone that danger had not yet passed. Federal agents had arrived in force. Flight manifests, passenger lists, and transaction records were being analyzed, revealing patterns that indicated the trafficking ring was larger than anyone had imagined. Reyes leaned over the table, staring at the strings of data connecting multiple states, shipping points, and financial transactions. Each connection was a thread in a web of exploitation and terror. And the most chilling realization hit him. This was only the tip of the iceberg. Atlas barked sharply, alert to a subtle movement near the hospital entrance. Reyes followed the dog's gaze to see a figure in a hoodie standing just outside the perimeter of security. The person seemed casual, but Atlas' growl warned of danger, low and insistent. Reyes' hand rested on his radio. "We may have company," he muttered. Officers moved quietly to intercept the individual, while Atlas remained vigilant, tail stiff, ears pricked. The sense of imminent threat was palpable. The restrained man, once a courier for the trafficking ring, continued to provide fragmented intelligence. He spoke of secret rendezvous points, coded messages, and threats that extended beyond the airport. Reyes listened intently, documenting each detail, aware that every fragment could lead to other victims. The man's words were chilling. "They don't care who gets hurt," he said. "They just want the delivery completed." His voice trembled, but his eyes revealed the deep fear of someone who had survived by following orders, barely. Outside the hospital, the public gathered in hushed curiosity, drawn by the flashing lights of news crews and the sense of something extraordinary having occurred. Phones recorded and streamed live, capturing the scene of a city held hostage by fear, awe, and fascination. But inside, Reyes knew that the public spectacle was secondary to the task at hand. Every piece of intelligence, every observation, every instinct mattered. And Atlas, ever alert, barked once more, a reminder that danger could approach from any direction. Investigators began coordinating a multi-state operation. Flight schedules, shipping routes, and coded communications pointed to a network that exploited fear, coercion, and desperation. Reyes felt the weight of responsibility pressing heavily on his shoulders. The infants were safe for now, but others might still be in peril, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the wrong person to overlook them. Atlas barked again, packing slightly, a physical manifestation of the tension that gripped everyone in the hospital. News reports painted Atlas as a hero, and the public response was overwhelming. Messages of gratitude and admiration poured in from across the country. Yet, Reyes knew the true heroism wasn't in the headlines. It was in the relentless vigilance, the instincts, the hours spent scanning the terminal for signs that most humans would miss. Atlas had saved the infants by sensing danger before anyone else could comprehend it. And now, as the investigation expanded, those instincts would be crucial once more. As night fell, the NICU grew quiet, the fragile hum of monitors the only sound punctuating the tense atmosphere. The first infant stirred, tiny hands flexing and curling, a weak cry escaping lips so small it seemed impossible that life could persist in such fragility. Reyes allowed himself a brief, tense smile. The second infant remained delicate, their vital signs erratic but showing signs of progress. Atlas sat at Reyes' side, alert, occasionally nudging him with a nose or paw, a reminder that vigilance never rested. Federal agents coordinated with local law enforcement to track the trafficking network. The data suggested multiple operative points, with personnel spread across cities and states, each following coded instructions to maintain secrecy. Reyes absorbed every piece of information, aware that even a single missed detail could jeopardize the lives of other infants or children trapped in similar situations. The stakes were enormous, the danger real, and the clock unforgiving. Suddenly, an alert from a field agent crackled over Reyes' radio. A potential lead, a warehouse on the outskirts of the city where suspicious shipments had been observed. The description matched the courier's testimony about drop-off points. Reyes' heart raced. Atlas barked sharply at the radio, as if understanding that action was imminent. Officers began mobilizing quietly, avoiding attention, while Reyes double-checked all protocols. The operation could not fail, not when lives hung in the balance. The public had begun speculating wildly about the story, unaware of the ongoing investigation. Social media posts glorified Atlas' heroism, while others questioned the airport's security procedures. Reyes knew that public fascination was both a tool and a distraction. The investigation required secrecy, precision, and speed. Atlas, sensing the gravity of the moment, remained alert, his body taut, ears pricked, eyes scanning for any anomaly. At the hospital, the infants continued to fight. Their fragile bodies, once nearly extinguished, responded slowly to warmth, oxygen, and careful attention. Reyes observed their tiny movements with a mixture of awe and determination. Every breath they took was a victory against the cruelty that had forced them into the suitcase. Atlas nudged Reyes' hand gently, a quiet reassurance, as if telling him that hope persisted even in the darkest of moments. The night stretched long, filled with tension, strategy, and anticipation. Reyes coordinated with multiple teams, reviewing flight manifests, surveillance footage, and coded communications. Each lead brought them closer to dismantling the trafficking network, but also closer to the danger itself. Atlas barked softly, packing slightly, reminding Reyes that instinct and vigilance were just as vital as data and intelligence. Hours later, a coordinated strike was prepared. Multiple vehicles, officers, and surveillance teams would converge on the warehouse simultaneously. Reyes and Atlas were positioned at the front, ready to intercept, protect, and react. The stakes were clear. Failure was not an option. Lives depended on their precision, bravery, and the unique instincts of the K-9 who had first sensed the danger. As the convoy moved silently through city streets, Reyes reflected on the journey so far. The infants were alive for now, thanks to a single dog's instincts and his own training. But the investigation was far from over. Atlas' bark had been the first warning, the first step in exposing a network of unimaginable cruelty. Now, as they approached the location identified in the intelligence, the tension was nearly unbearable. The warehouse loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, shadows stretching across the cracked pavement. Reyes crouched, hand resting lightly on Atlas' collar, the dog's muscles coiled like springs ready to react. Officers moved into position, silent and tense. The mission to dismantle the trafficking ring and rescue potential victims was about to begin. Reyes whispered to Atlas, voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "This is it, boy. Stay sharp. Watch my back." Atlas barked once, low and determined, tail stiff, ears pricked, eyes locked on the warehouse. Every instinct, every ounce of vigilance would be critical. The danger was real, the stakes higher than ever, and the lives of innocent children hung in the balance. The moment stretched, suspense thickening like fog. Inside the warehouse, shadows shifted. Outside, the team waited, breath held, hearts hammering. The investigation, the rescue, and the pursuit of justice had reached a pivotal point. And as Atlas growled low, warning of movement within, Reyes knew one truth. The fight was far from over, and the danger they faced would test every limit of courage, loyalty, and instinct. The warehouse loomed like a shadowed monolith against the night sky, a silent fortress concealing untold horrors. Officer Daniel Reyes crouched behind a rusted delivery truck, Atlas pressed firmly to his side, muscles taut, ears pricked. The German shepherd's low growl vibrated through the air, a living warning that danger was near. The operation to dismantle the trafficking ring had reached its climax. One wrong move and innocent lives would be lost. Every detail mattered, every instinct could tip the scales between rescue and catastrophe. Inside, the warehouse was a labyrinth of shipping crates and dim lighting. Shadows danced across the walls as the ring's operatives moved cautiously, unaware that law enforcement had closed in. Reyes' pulse pounded in his chest. He scanned the perimeter, noting entry points, structural weaknesses, and the probable locations where victims could be held. Atlas nudged him gently, tail stiff, eyes locked on the nearest doorway as if signaling, "They're close. Ready yourself." Reyes gave the hand signal. Officers positioned themselves strategically, silent, disciplined, every step rehearsed yet filled with real danger. The tension was palpable, the weight of responsibility suffocating. Lives innocent, fragile, and terrified hung in the balance. Outside, the city's hum was a distant echo, the world unaware of the life-and-death drama about to unfold inside this nondescript warehouse. A sudden shift inside the shadows caught Atlas' attention. He barked sharply, low and commanding. The growl rumbled through the team, instantly heightening alertness. Rey's heart leapt. Atlas had detected movement before the human eye could perceive it, a sign that the operatives were close to discovering them, or that victims were nearby. "Go," Reyes commanded. Officers surged forward, weapons drawn, tactical precision guiding every motion. Atlas led the charge, nose low, ears pricked, teeth bared, a force of nature cutting through the dark. The first confrontation was explosive. Operatives, caught off guard, scrambled as law enforcement moved in. Shouts echoed through the cavernous space. Atlas lunged forward, intercepting a man who had advanced on one of the officers. Teeth sank into the assailant's arm, forcing him back, while Reyes subdued another. The team moved swiftly, covering every angle, clearing each aisle and crate. Fear, adrenaline, and the will to protect surged in every officer. Then came the cries, faint, almost imperceptible at first. Reyes froze. He had heard that sound before, faint and desperate. Atlas barked sharply, alerting the team. The sounds were coming from a corner of the warehouse concealed behind stacked crates. Reyes' stomach twisted. Infants. Victims. Alive but hidden, terrified. The team surged forward, clearing the last barricade. There, in a small, dimly lit area, were 3 infants, swaddled and trembling. Their tiny bodies shivered, pale and fragile, eyes wide with terror and confusion. One whimper grew into a weak, desperate cry. Atlas barked, a low rumble vibrating through his chest, tail stiff, protective, almost triumphant. Reyes knelt immediately, gently lifting the first infant into his arms. Relief and horror collided. The bobbies had survived, but just barely. The operatives tried to resist, but the team had full control. Shouts, threats, and panic filled the warehouse, but they were no match for the coordinated effort of law enforcement. Atlas remained at Reyes' side, growling, barking, muscles coiled like springs. ensuring no one could approach the infants. Reyes glanced at the dog, eyes wide with awe. This canine had been the difference between life and death, not just for the airport rescue, but for this operation as well. Minutes later, all operatives were restrained, handcuffed, and led out into the night. Federal agents immediately began questioning them, piecing together the network of trafficking, coercion, and cruelty. Evidence seized included shipment manifests, coded communications, and photographs documenting the network's operations. Reyes watched as the pieces fell into place. A sprawling, terrifying ring that preyed on the most vulnerable, now unraveling before their eyes. The infants were carefully carried to awaiting ambulances, swaddled in blankets and given supplemental oxygen. Reyes stayed close, Atlas at his side, watching over them as the paramedics worked. Their tiny bodies were still fragile, but their survival was a testament to resilience, human vigilance, and the unyielding instincts of a German shepherd who refused to look away. As the ambulances departed, Reyes allowed himself a moment to breathe. Atlas barked softly, tail flicking in reassurance, eyes bright and alert. The dog's instincts had saved lives repeatedly in moments that defied comprehension. Every bark, every growl, every tense stance had been critical. Reyes knelt, resting a hand on Atlas' head. "We did it, boy," he whispered. "You saved them all." Atlas leaned into him, a silent acknowledgement, proud, vigilant, unwavering. News outlets had caught wind of the raid. Live footage streamed across the country, capturing the dramatic rescue, the apprehension of traffickers, and the heroic role of Atlas. Social media exploded. Citizens praised the dog, officers, and first responders. Messages of gratitude flooded in from strangers, from parents, from anyone who could imagine the terror and relief of those infants. But Reyes knew the true victory wasn't the viral acclaim, it was the lives saved, fragile yet fighting, because of teamwork, courage, and instinct. Hours later, Reyes finally entered the hospital NICU. The infants were stable, their tiny hands flexing, eyes blinking, weak but alive. Nurses monitored their vitals closely, but for the first time since the suitcase was discovered, there was a tangible sense of hope. Atlas sat quietly at Reyes' side, still alert, tail occasionally flicking, eyes scanning for the next potential threat. Reyes gently stroked the dog's fur. "You were amazing, Atlas. More than a hero, you were their guardian." Outside the hospital, federal agents continued dismantling the trafficking network, securing evidence and interviewing operatives. The scale of the operation was staggering, and the repercussions would ripple far beyond the city. Reyes knew that justice was just beginning, that the network would face the full force of the law. But for now, the immediate danger had passed, the victims had been rescued, and the first threads of hope were weaving into the darkness. The public response was overwhelming. Stories of Atlas' heroism dominated headlines, videos went viral, and citizens across the country shared their admiration and relief. Yet Reyes remained grounded, aware that heroism often existed in quiet vigilance, in instincts trusted and acted upon when seconds meant life or death. Atlas had embodied that principle fully, tirelessly, and with unwavering loyalty. As dawn broke over the city, Reyes stood outside the hospital, Atlas at his side, watching the first light spread across the streets. The infants were alive. The traffickers were captured. The network had been exposed. And yet, Reyes knew the fight to protect the innocent never truly ended. There would always be shadows where cruelty lurked, and there would always be lives that depended on vigilance, courage, and instinct. Atlas barked softly once, tail wagging slightly, eyes bright and unwavering. Reyes knelt, resting a hand on the dog's head. "We did good," he whispered. "We saved them." The city's skyline reflected the rising sun, golden light illuminating streets that for one night had witnessed fear, hope, and heroism in equal measure. And as Officer Daniel Reyes and Atlas walked away from the hospital, their bond stronger than ever, one truth remained clear. Courage, loyalty, and instinct had won the day, and in a world filled with darkness, even the smallest acts of vigilance could change the course of life forever. The infants would live, the traffickers would face justice, And the story of a heroic dog who barked at a suitcase in an airport would inspire awe, gratitude, and hope for generations. Yet somewhere in the shadows, Reyes knew the work would continue. There would always be danger, always be innocent lives at risk, and always be a need for heroes, both human and canine, ready to answer the call. Atlas barked once more, sharp and clear, a promise of vigilance. Reyes smiled, exhausted but determined. Together they had faced the unimaginable, saved lives, and confronted cruelty. And together they would be ready for whatever came next. The night's tension had broken, the city exhaled, and hope endured. But the memory of those moments, and the knowledge of what could have been, lingered, a reminder that vigilance, courage, and loyalty were the thin line between life and death. And in that truth, Atlas and Officer Daniel Reyes had proven themselves unmatched.